Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the American Muslim Wellness Initiative here at Johns Hopkins University, this is our second event in what we hope will be a series over the coming months and hopefully years, profiling American Muslims and their existence in this country, in this institution, and in this city. My name is Adnan A. I'm a professor of international health here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I'm happily volunteering to coordinate this initiative, at least till such time that others step up to the plate. But it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the second event, and also particular welcome to those of you who are listening to us online. This event is being live streamed, so we hope that those of you joining us from different parts of this country, as well as, I'm told, a few other countries, enjoy and participate, if you can, on email and in other ways. I'm really excited about this event. It's not only our second event, but also it's a very important event because we are going to profile what I think is a critical important feature of the life of American Muslims in this country, which is American Muslim women, and particularly American Muslim women in the professions. And we are delighted that today we have a range of such individuals represented on our panel. So I have an extremely limited role here, which is simply to introduce our moderators, and they will take over and take us through the event here. I'm so excited that two of our very own students, also American Muslim women, are going to moderate this discussion for us. I want to introduce Rabia Karani, who is a medical student at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, also graduated from Johns Hopkins undergrad campus, and is also pursuing her Master's of Public Health at the School of Public Health here between her third and fourth year. Rabia's interest is at the intersection of education, health, and vulnerable populations, and she will be applying for residency training very soon in the future. So thank you, Rabia, for co-moderating this event. And her partner is Mariya Patwa. Mariya is a MSPH, a Master's of Science in Public Health student in the Department of International Health in the Health Systems program. Her interests are around maternal and child health and vulnerable populations. And in fact, she will be heading to South Africa for a practicum where she'll be studying women's empowerment in that particular location. So I'm truly excited. I hope you make this more of a conversation rather than a speaking event. I know that our speakers are very experienced and would like to have a conversation around American Muslim in the professions. I'm going to hand over now to Rabia and Mariya.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hyder, and thank you everyone for joining us for the second Amwell seminar event. Rabia and I are extremely excited to be facilitating this discussion with our three incredible panelists. The goal of this panel is to continue our seminar discussions on understanding Muslim Americans. Today, we hope that you take this opportunity to learn more about the intersections of faith, culture, and professional lives led by Muslim American women in the United States. We have the chance to get a window into the journeys of our three panelists, Dr. Uzma Haque, Laila el-Haddad, who is on her way right now, and Dr. Lara Oyetunji. Before we begin, we'd like to tell you a little bit about the structure of this panel and how you can participate.
So thank you, Dr. Hyder and Mariya. So a little bit of intro about Mariya and I. We were both born and raised here in the United States, and we consider ourselves to be American Muslims. We both put a lot of thought into how we would like to see this panel unfold today. You know, we talked to our friends and colleagues, we reflected on our own experiences, and we came up with three initial questions that we would like to pose to our panelists based on the themes that came up in these discussions. So the structure of this panel today, we'll be posing three initial questions to the panelists. We're going to be handing out note cards right now, and then at the end of these three questions, you can either pass your note cards to the right at the end of the aisle, and we will collect them and read out your questions or comments, or you can use the microphone to ask your questions and share your comments. We hope the note cards can be useful to you as you think about what you might want to hear or contribute to the discussion as you learn more about our panelists. We really appreciate your participation in this event.
Okay, so to get things started, we wanted to pose to the panelists. We'd like to ask each of you for a few minutes to introduce yourselves and share some of the key events in your professional and personal journeys.
Sure, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Uzma Haque. I'm a clinician by training, and I've been faculty here in the Division of Rheumatology now for quite some time. It's certainly a privilege and an honor for me to be a part of this panel today. And I want to thank the organizers for putting this event together. So while I call Baltimore my home, I was made in Pakistan. I was born into a family of 3 girls and 1 boy. Both my parents were professionals. My mother was a physician in the Pakistani army, and my father was an army officer as well. As an army child, I moved around a lot, but it was wonderful how you could always find a community in every cantonment that my father and my mother were posted to. As a young girl, I fell in love with science. The whole process of thinking about a question and hypothesizing about its possible answers were just fascinating to me. And I must say that I was very lucky to be born in a family where a girl was allowed to dream and was given every opportunity to fulfill that dream. So my dream took me to medical school in Karachi, Pakistan. The name of the school is Aga Khan Medical School. And it was in this school that I found my future partner and my current husband, Uzma Haque, who's also a physician here in the United States. So after graduating from medical school, both of us came to the US, as so many of our friends did, for further training. I initially landed in Cleveland, Ohio, and that was a big shock for me, coming from warm, hot Pakistan to cold, snowy Cleveland, but we did our residency training there. And then both of us moved to Baltimore, right here at Johns Hopkins, where we did our respective fellowships, myself in rheumatology and my husband in nephrology. Somehow, between those extended years of training, we managed to produce 2 girls. So I have 2 girls, one aged 20 and the other one about to turn 18 soon. After finishing my fellowship training here in Baltimore, we actually moved to Mississippi for 4 years. This was as a part of my visa requirement. We stayed in a small little town in Mississippi where there were 2 traffic lights, and we stayed there for 4 years. After finishing that requirement, my love for academia brought me back to Baltimore, back to Johns Hopkins. And I've since been a member and faculty here in the Division of Rheumatology. While as a clinician, I take care of the breadth of rheumatic diseases. I consider myself to have special expertise in inflammatory arthritis because that's my area of research and clinical care. But really, among all the different missions of this institution, I consider myself an educator first. I have great passion in educating the next generation of physicians, and this is where I'm immensely involved in my division, training physicians at different levels, both as medical students, as residents, and as fellows. So that's so much about my professional life and where I am at this point. But when I step back and think about myself and look at my journey and look in the mirror and see the person who I am, I must say that my cultural heritage has had a great role to fashion me into the person that I am today. I'm very proud of my Pakistani heritage, and that's reflected in my love for our food, my language, the literature, poetry, our music. I learned to train in classical vocals in South Asia, and of course my love for the game of cricket. If any of you know that people from India, Pakistan, and South Asia, we're crazy about the game, and so am I. And my life, of course, has been fashioned by my faith as well. I was born in a Muslim family, and I consider and identify myself as a Muslim. I practice Islam in the way that I saw it being practiced by my parents and by my grandparents, with the core values of respect, compassion, empathy, tolerance for each other, and for trying to make this world a better place every day. I consider myself very lucky to have been fashioned by 2 different countries, 2 great institutions, Aga Khan back in Pakistan and Johns Hopkins here in the US, and to have been given space and opportunity to reflect on who I am and to be the person that I am today. I'm certainly very happy to be here today, and I am looking forward to any of the questions that you may have for me, for myself as a Pakistani Muslim American woman. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's amazing how much you learn about your panelists from sitting up here, because I started my journey in America in Mississippi. So we'll get to that part of the story. But thank you to the moderators for inviting me to be on this panel. I think this is a unique place to have these conversations. I mean, and Hopkins sort of provides that environment where we can have these conversations. So I was born and raised in Nigeria. I spent about half of my life growing up in Saudi Arabia because my dad, who was a physician, he worked there. So we spent about 4 to 6 months in Saudi Arabia, and I went to school in Nigeria. And I came to the States, well, I graduated high school when I was 16, but my mom would not let a 16-year-old come to America by herself. It was just not gonna happen. So I came here when I was 17, and I landed in Atlanta. But it was on my way to Mississippi. So I went to undergrad in Mississippi, and this is a 17-year-old sort of just dropped in the middle of Mississippi. But my strong sort of sense of identity from being Nigerian, it never occurred to me to feel any kind of way about being in Mississippi. Because a lot of people were like, oh, wow, Mississippi. Aren't you afraid to be there? I was like, why would I be? And so I had a wonderful time in Mississippi. I think I was set up for success in the rest of my path by virtue of being at the University of Mississippi. I was able to gain leadership roles. I became a resident assistant like 3 months after I got to America. I joined the Honors College, and that sort of helped set me on the path to going to medical school, which was somewhat unheard of in Mississippi. They said, well, international students cannot go to medical school. And unfortunately, that's something that a lot of international students believed. So a lot of my friends ended up in pharmacy and in nursing or other scientific fields because they were told that international students can't go to medical school in the US. What they didn't know was, ever since I could remember, I've always wanted to be a doctor. And I don't know where that came from. Some people think that it might have come from my dad being a doctor. Because we didn't live together, I didn't really see him in that role. He was just my dad. But I wasn't going to come all the way from Nigeria to America to go to get medical training for someone to tell me at the very get-go that it wasn't gonna happen, because that was not going to happen. So I went to the University of Chicago for medical school, and then I finished there and went to the University of Washington for general surgery residency. I spent 2 years at the NIH doing research, and then I went back to UW to complete my surgical training, which I finished last summer. And I am now a full-time MPH student here at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I also work part-time as a clinical associate in general surgery at Bayview Medical Center. My plans in 3 weeks, when this ends, is to go back to University of Washington to get my, for fellowship training in cardiothoracic surgery. So that's sort of my professional background to here. Like you said, I think growing up in Nigeria and having a strong sense of self and who I was, and also growing up being Muslim, I mean, my family, for as many generations as I can remember, are all Muslims. And in Nigeria, there are sort of these 3 parts to the country. There's the eastern part of the country where they're mostly Christian. There's the northern part of the country that are mostly Muslim. And I'm from the southwestern part of the country where it's about 50-50. So we grew up in sort of this tolerant world where it didn't even matter what you were. Muslims celebrated, I mean, my favorite holiday back home was Christmas because it meant I could just enjoy it. So we were very tolerant of each other. And coming to America and starting off in the South, where I sort of had to deal with 2 different issues. One is the South is deeply religious. And they're also very friendly. So every person I met, or I would have a conversation in line in the grocery store, and it would lead to an invitation to come to church with them on Sunday. And I would have to say, oh, sorry, I'm Muslim. But because people had gotten to know me first, they were somewhat okay with it, so they were open to having a conversation about what being Muslim meant, because for a lot of them, I was the first Muslim that they had met. So I think having that strong sense of who I was as a person didn't allow anyone to tell me that I wasn't good enough, or my faith was the wrong faith, or I came to America with knowing who I was, what I wanted, and I think I've been able to achieve that. Thank you.
Great.
So I'm really happy to see that Laila el-Haddad has joined us, and I was wondering if we could pose the same question to you. I know you probably want to catch your breath for a second.
No, it's okay.
But so the first question that we had asked everyone was to introduce themselves and share some of the highlights and key events of their professional and personal journey.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you for having us, and I'm honored to be here. Sorry I'm a little bit late, but it's like, the story of my life is like rushing from one place to another. So I don't know if there was introductions. I guess there weren't, okay. So I'm Laila. I was born in Kuwait to Palestinian parents and kind of spent my summers journeying back and forth to Palestine, to the Gaza Strip specifically. They were both physicians who worked in the Gulf, and then eventually I came here to the US for college and grad school, and that's where I met my husband, Yassine, who works here, who's also Palestinian. I guess I would say, and then I worked for many years as a journalist in Palestine, and then I'm currently a freelance journalist and writer and author, and mother of 3.5. But anyway, so in terms of some of the things that in our personal and professional journeys, I guess I would say for me, part of what shaped my experience initially growing up was being a Palestinian without a document or a passport or whatever. You know, that really has an impact on you in the sense that you learn very early on to kind of live with constant vulnerability and just to expect the unexpected at any moment. And I think in a way that set me up in a positive sense for sort of challenges that I would face later on as I came to the US. Not that, you know, meaning certain things that I feel like some people might be wary of. I feel like been there, done that kind of thing. So, but a lot of our lives growing up, we were constantly told like, nothing is permanent. You just have to get used to constantly moving from one place to another. At any moment, we could get kicked out of here. You know, whatever, really arduous, you know, journeys across land crossings to get back home and renew our IDs and so on and so forth. And then when I came to the US, it was kind of, for me, an awakening of my Islamic identity. Not that it wasn't awoke, but it was sort of, you know, there. It was like, you know, you're kind of born with it. But when you're here, suddenly it surfaces because suddenly you're not just, or you're not Palestinian, whereas that was sort of the main identity living in the Middle East, but you're first and foremost a visible, observant Muslim, and that's what people see. And it took a while, I would say, to kind of, not a while, but I would say that in summary, to find or own my voice and multiple identities, as it were, right? And negotiate those different spaces and identities in a way that could, I was fine with, but also in a way that spoke that I could convey to other people so that they could relate and understand the experiences. Because I learned, you know, through my life and through my experience as a journalist and writer and whatnot, that the most effective way to be able to share these journeys and experiences is in a way that's relatable to people, and being able to reach out, find your voice, narrate your experiences, right? And own all those identities, you know, be they your ethnic identities, your religious identity, and sort of not be afraid to put them all out there and talk about them. So I don't know if that's kind of what you were looking for, but yeah.
That's perfect.
Well, thank you to each of our speakers for those incredible introductions. Our second question is, we were wondering if each of you could describe a little bit about how your faith and cultural background has influenced your career and personal life. So we did talk about that, yes. So what is one unexpected part of your professional life, and what is something that you wish a mentor had told you when you were making the decisions to enter your respective fields?
So I sort of already touched upon how my culture and my faith have sort of impacted my professional life. Nigerians, I'm sure a lot of you have met a lot of Nigerians, but once you get to a point, once you get to where you're going, you realize that failure is not an option. And I think that background didn't let me accept any other option. And I don't know if it's been luck or my faith, but pretty much what I've always wanted in terms of my career path has come to be. I almost never have a plan B which I'm not recommending that people don't have, but it was just when you're sure that you put in the work and you have the faith and things happen the way they will happen, and I guess it's happened the way I've envisioned it to happen. So I think the hard work was probably from my Nigerian background and my faith, and has let me know that what I want and what I pray for the most part, and what I work hard towards will come to be. Something I wish a mentor had told me, so I have had a lot of mentors, and they have come in all shapes, forms, and so I have not been surprised by my surgical training so far. Ever since, and interestingly, my dad's a surgeon, but we never talk about surgery, so I don't think that part, and he did not even want me to become a surgeon because he was worried about the implications for a female. But everyone that I meet, every female that I meet, every Black person that I meet, I ask about their experiences being in surgery. I just came back from the Society of Black Academic Surgeons conference in Chicago, and it was a room full of 200 plus Black surgeons who were doing what I wanted to do. But I didn't think to myself, well, I've been in surgery for the last 8 years. I know what there is to know, because no, I don't. So every chance I got, and every chance I get now, I still ask females about their experience. I still ask Black people about their experience. Interestingly, I haven't met a Muslim surgeon yet. But I have enough of those role models in my life that I don't need that. So I have not been surprised, because I've had so many mentors that I just sort of constantly ask questions. So if anyone has questions about what it's like being a Muslim and female in surgery, you could ask me.
So I think I would second, I have a very similar experience to Lara. I think when you start your journey to medical school, there are so many different steps along the way. There's so many people that you interact with, and I think you have a reasonable sense of what you are heading towards. But I would say to somebody who's stepping into medicine now is that you have to remember it's not a career choice, it's a life choice. This is the one career where really, your life will be fashioned by this choice. I think that's true for other careers too, but I think it is particularly true for medicine. I think what you were just mentioning, this sense of you have to do the best that you can, and then leave it to the faith, and leave it to God, and leave it to the fact that whatever happens for a very good reason. And I think these are some of the ways we justify what happens to us along our lives, but they have very good value to it. It takes away frustration, this sense of hostility towards a certain environment or a system. And I'm hoping that I'm teaching my girls exactly that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we did touch a little bit on this stuff. I feel like I'm the odd one out here because I'm not in the medical field, but I'm, born into a family of physicians and surgeons, and married into also the same field, and my brothers and everyone else. But touching on both faith, culture, I guess, and what I wish a mentor had told me. Well, I'll just say this, that my parents were probably my best mentors, both being physicians and, especially my mother at a time in the 70s, she was working in Saudi Arabia, one of two female physicians at the time where we were working, and she was working full-time and raising us and so on and so forth. But both of them actively encouraged me not to study medicine. This is the irony. So they actually said, whatever you want, because, that was the path I was on all the way until high school. And then my father, the surgeon, was like, look, just do yourself a favor. Like, I know you can do this, but just you're so much better at many other things. So do the things that you're more passionate about. If you're not 100% dedicated to medicine, like not, if you're 99%, don't do it. If you're 98%, whatever, don't do it. He's like, not because, like you were saying about it being a life choice. He was like, not because I don't think you can do it, or, this isn't about us or pleasing us or what society thinks or what you think is like a, something that's, think about the kinds of things that you're talented at and how you can benefit the larger community, society, whatever world with those talents, not necessarily just what's kind of, so yeah, and so it took me a while, but yeah, I saw his point, and thanks to them that, very actively saying, but if you did want to do this, we'll support you. If you did want to do that, it has nothing to do with what we want or what, whatever you think that you're good at, we'll be for you, we'll be there for you all the way. And I think that's really important that parents, because not even like as we're now become parents and raising our children, each of our children is very different in terms of the kinds of talents they have. And I know sometimes it like will kill my husband, because why aren't you? Because we're both like super type A, and like our son is just very chill and relax. And mashallah, he does really well, but at his own pace and his own, way of approaching things. He doesn't succumb to peer pressure. He's very, level-headed. And so he can't fathom how he, produced a son that's not like him. So, so I'm like, just let him be, So it really does take a lot of parents to be able to recognize those talents in their children, nurture them, and say, and this is what I think you should do, or if you think. So that's one. But touching on the faith aspect, absolutely, this has been sort of a cornerstone, I think, something that my mother specifically instilled in us, which is the tawakkul, as we say in Islam, sort of the reliance on God in all matters. And I think sometimes I feel in moments of crises, this is something that really distinguishes, I think, I can't generalize and say like all Muslims, but at least, observant or the faithful from others, in the sense that no matter what happens, you just say, okay, my reliance is on God. Good or bad, you are supposed to accept that this is sort of part of a divine plan and just kind of go with it and be like, there's a greater purpose for this, and not totally break down and have a meltdown if something really horrible happens. And really horrible things have happened in my life, and I'm sure a lot of other people as well. But just learning to finding your faith in those moments, and seeking the wisdom, and sometimes the inexplicable, just accepting the inexplicable as what it is something that my mother nurtured in us, to always, again, seek assistance in the Almighty, to find that, to exercise tawakkul at all moments. I'm trying to think what else. And finally, to live life like a traveler, right? So very light, never get it. And I talked a little bit about how my Palestinian background influenced this, but never get used to any one place, and I know it sounds like really dark and cynical, but meaning like at any moment you could either, pass away or something horrible could happen, but not in that sense of like always being pessimistic, but just live your life like a journey, very like a traveler rather, very lightly, right? And there's actually a saying by one of the companions of the Prophet about how, live your life as though you will, or do good as though you will live forever, and what is it? I'm forgetting the actual thing. Or do good as though you will die tomorrow, or something like that. In the sense that, again, just, attachment, don't be too attached to any person or thing or place at one moment. And remember that this life is just sort of one stage that we're passing through to the rest. And I think the last thing I would say that I learned from my mother is to never take no for an answer. And finally, on what sorts of things that, I don't think there was anything a mentor. I think something you're constantly learning. But maybe one thing I would recommend to those who are still kind of in the early stages is whatever it is that you're interested in, try to do an internship or training or shadowing. I think that is really helpful, and is, if you have a chance to do that. If you're someone who's traveling, like I was always traveling back and forth, so I didn't have a chance to do that as much. But I think that's really helpful in helping you decide if this is the right field for you.
Thank you all to all the panelists for their answers to these questions. And I guess now we would like to invite people, if they would like to come up to the mics, or if they'd like to pass their note cards along to the end, and we can read out some of the questions that hopefully some of you have from the audience. I'll give you a couple minutes to gather your thoughts and come to the mic.
I think it's wonderful that you're all very strong, independent, admirable Muslim women in America, and it's really important to give exposure to other populations and other communities who don't always interact with Muslims to show that, you guys exist and we are here and, contribute to society. But even within the Muslim community, I think there is still a need to address those issues of saying, yes, women can be independent and strong and pursue their dreams and work hard. And because, a lot of immigrants, they come to America not only bringing Islam, but bringing some of their cultural norms, which may be more traditional or restrictive. And the fathers and the uncles and the grandfathers want their daughters to grow up within those restrictions. And there's that balancing act of those children growing up in America, seeing the values of being independent, but also at home, their parents wanting them to be very obedient and things like that. And so how do you navigate these conversations with those family members or community members or colleagues who, still want, particularly the males in the community who believe that Muslim women should behave in a certain way or dress in a certain way or act in a certain way with, the American values of being able to do all the things that you guys have, described to us or summarized to us that you've been able to do in your careers?
So I think I'm going to start by, thank you very much for that question. I think what is very important for us to recognize is that systematic oppression of women has been something that we have been working against over centuries. And in any culture and in any, I'm not going to say that religion wants to do that, but there have been definitely examples of how some organization has been used to, I would say, oppress women. And I think this is not only true for Islam. I think it is true for so many different, like I said, different faiths. And it's that people have worked through this over centuries and times. And you're absolutely right. I mean, back in Pakistan at this time, as you know, in certain parts of this world, we are still dealing with honor killing. But if you think about it, here in the US, you have a jilted boyfriend who picks up a gun and feels that he can go and kill the ex-girlfriend or other people. So it is almost like a similar process that sometimes is handed out to women throughout the world, right? And so I guess our goal is to work against it and to make people realize that there's no faith that is telling us to step back. There's no culture that is telling women to step back. And this may be, people may look at this in different ways. I can only look at it how I look at it. And I have two young girls who I have raised in this country. They're proud Americans of Pakistani heritage. As a mother, I try to minimize the conflict that sometimes I can or my culture can pose on them. I want them to understand what are the core values of Islam, what are the core values of being a Pakistani American, and I want to make sure, and I'm hoping that they are trying to live by that, while at the same time accommodating to this country, because at the end of the day, they are Americans. And I cannot expect them to behave in a way that they would even myself growing up in Pakistan, I did not experience any of the things that you're telling me about men saying that, you cannot step into this arena or whatever. So I think, I think it is key for us as American Muslims to make sure that there's relative harmony between the American culture and the Islamic values. And I honestly think that there is and there can be.
Again, it's difficult sometimes to speak about experiences that you didn't personally have. I agree. I never faced any of those things, but that's not to say they don't exist or people haven't faced them. The way I see it in the American context is these things sort of are happening in parallel, right? There's work to be done within the community, or there's conversations to be had within the community, and then there's, you know, work outside of the community. They don't necessarily have to clash. And I've learned over time that, you know, these are things that can evolve separately, and you know, in reference to sort of the uncles and the aunties and whatever, I think what I've found most often is that this contingent responds best to social norms, and when the norm around them has changed, or when, you know, it's not like something you can say, look, I need to have sit down and let me just explain a few things to you, because there also is an element of like sort of respect of the elders and whatever, and that's probably what you're referencing is like, how do you approach this issue? But I've learned it works well that way in larger settings, and as social norms evolved. And really the best way is to lead by example and get involved in your community. Oftentimes I find, especially a lot of young people will shy away and be like, this is just a backwards community, or I can't deal with this anymore, what is this? And they just won't even, but, you know, and it's difficult, but the more you're involved, the more you have a say, the more, you know, so that's the number one thing I would say. But also know your dean in reference to knowing, because you're right, and ultimately, you know, knowledge is power in this context. If you understand the history and the deen and the whatever, then you can come back and say, actually, in, you know, this hadith or in this, you know, this is what is suggested or said, and this has no place. That's something else that's lacking that I find a lot, oftentimes, even in our own communities. Sometimes I'll have arguments with women about like this, that, or the other, and I'll say, well, what's your, you know, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ, bring your evidence, in the verse in the Quran, and they'll be like, I don't know, you know, and I'm like, exactly, so you need to know. Right. So that's what I would say, is it's not an antagonistic thing per se, it's just, you know, lead by example, get involved, know your deen, and then continue to have these conversations and let things kind of evolve. Yeah, let things evolve.
So I think the most important part, it starts at home. And I never felt like, I have 5 brothers, I'm the only girl, and I was never held to a different academic standard than they were. In fact, my brother's kid, that I was the smartest, or I always act like I'm the smartest in the family. I'm a know-it-all. It's like, you know, can you just not get A's and just stop making us look bad? So if anything, I was pushed to achieve. So my parents realized the value of education. My mom is a teacher, and between her and my father, I was just pushed to always do my best. Anything less than my perfect score was not good enough. Interestingly, the Nigerian culture is also that of, so there are lots of women in, you know, professional in the professional workforce. However, you can be, you know, the CEO of a hospital, but when you come home, you're expected to become obedient. You're expected to do all the house chores. You're expected to, you know, do all the childcare. And I grew up resisting that, and they, you know, even now they're like, oh, you're getting your feminist idea from America. I was like, actually, no, Mom. If you remember back when I resented the fact that my brothers were outside playing while I was cooking, when I wanted to go play with them. So I think the family unit is really where it starts from. And I've been lucky to have had a family that has told me that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And I sort of just figured my way around the other parts of the family that said that I have to do all the house chores and the cooking. But I think it's also important that people see, like, you know, these kinds of forums where people see that if you're not lucky enough to have that kind of home environment that tells you, and you don't see, it's important for you to see other people doing what you envision yourself doing someday. So I think we're all here. I mean, everyone who's in this room is affiliated to Johns Hopkins in some way, shape, or form, which means that you guys are, you know, leaders in your field. So I feel like it's our charge to go out there and find the women, find the Muslim women, find, you know, the Black women, or wherever you're from. Show them that you exist and that they can become what you are. Because for some, they haven't seen that.
So this is actually something I feel like my mother has encountered on my behalf. I come from a fairly traditional Pakistani Muslim community in Houston, and while most of the kids in that community are born and raised here, it is somewhat unusual for a girl to leave that community at the age of 17 and go somewhere all by herself, which is what I did. I came here to Baltimore from Houston for college when I was 17. I mean, it wasn't like Lara's journey, but it was still unusual at the time. And people in our community often ask my mother why she let her daughter go so far away from home. And my mom, she's just an incredible support to me in all of this, because she's someone that believes in total equality for men and women. The way we were raised, my brother actually probably had more limitations than I did, because my mom trusts me more. And my mom gives people this answer that, we came to this country to give our children opportunities. And if I trust my daughter, why would I limit her by geography? I raised her in a way that I trust her. So my answer to that would be, I was very blessed in that my mother is someone who's just an incredible support in this way, very feminist, very forward-thinking. But if you, don't have someone in your family like that, find a mentor. And that's something I always try to do, whenever I go back to Houston and even here, give back, give people advice, talk to people that you think may need your help, or, vice versa. If you want to find a mentor, just find someone that you feel has gone into the field you've gone into, or who has, overcome those obstacles and limitations.
So thank you for all of your responses. I have a couple questions that came from the audience, and I'm going to combine two of them. So one of the questions is have you ever been discriminated against because of your faith at any point during your career? And then the other question, if you want to respond with as well, is how do you see yourself in your profession changing people's understanding of Islam, and particularly for women?
So I will say no, I have not experienced discrimination, because people don't look at me because I don't wear the hijab. They don't look at me and tell immediately that I'm Muslim. So by the time they get to the point that they find out, which is usually during Ramadan, and they find out, they're like, why are you so low energy? Or why aren't you eating? Or, if I say, I don't eat pork, and that starts off a conversation of, oh, are you vegetarian? So I feel like in my professional encounters, people have gotten to know me. And even if they haven't gotten to know me, they know enough of, oh, she's a surgeon, like she's successful, so there is not outward discrimination. Instead, what happens is they're open to questions. Then they ask me more questions. So I feel like I've been fortunate enough in my professional setting to have been on the other end of the spectrum, where I've gotten to know people enough that they feel comfortable asking questions that they otherwise wouldn't have, or they're able to challenge their beliefs, or they're like, oh wow, I would never have thought that you were Muslim. So I start off with, well, what do you think a Muslim is? So I have not experienced discrimination in my professional encounters.
And I would say the same. I've been in this country for 25 years now. June the 3rd this year, it would have been 25 years. And I have never experienced discrimination either at profession, in terms of my profession, social events, etc. And that might be exactly because of what you just said. I mean, I do not, use anything that identifies myself as a Muslim. In fact, I can tell you that, I have patients that have been taken care of for 10, 15 years since I've come back to Baltimore. Most of my patients do not know that I am, what is my faith. I think in the US, we never talk about who we voted for, now more than ever. And I don't think faith has ever been really an issue for us to talk about. But I think, with the current climate and the new change in environment, I think it's kind of interesting. Some of my patients have now brought it up themselves that, do I feel uncomfortable living here? Am I safe? That they worry about me? And I think it was very endearing for me to get a sense that they are, they're worried for my well-being. But no, in general, there's a lot of positive things too in this country, and hopefully we can address, your last question at the end. But no, I have not ever experienced discrimination at any level.
Because I'm not in a stationary workplace, I guess the question is a bit, I would just say whether I've experienced discrimination, period, because I never worked in a office or something like that. But there's been, and I'm not always very, I don't really operate in the way of where someone's discriminating against me. So I just kind of do my thing. But I will say that I remember when I first was engaged to Yassine, and we were walking around in Boston, and he kept saying, like, do you notice people are looking? Do you notice? Like, what are you talking about? And then he suddenly noticed, because same thing, people wouldn't recognize him as being Muslim, but suddenly he felt like a lot more like, you know, maybe nothing obvious, but things I wouldn't have picked up on, but he definitely noticed people like looking a little bit more. But again, it just doesn't really faze me as much. I mean, there's been mostly, I would say, people just, well, sometimes there'll be incidents, because I only speak to my children in Arabic, so we have like a full immersion household. So often they assume that I just don't speak English, and there'll be like things that'll just really tick me off, that'll just come to me and like speak in really slow English, like, you whatever. And then, so yeah, I've had things like that happen, or, I was denied in Boston rent once because, and the guy specifically said, because I was Muslim. Things like that. I've had reverse, if you can call it that, discrimination, in the sense that often in communities of secular Arabs, I'll find more discrimination. It's ironic, because especially when I was working in Palestine, and the people that tend to be in the fields of like media or whatever, NGO world, tend to be of the more secular nature. We'd be in a middle conversation, and they'll be like, just wait, stop, let me just get this straight. You live in the US and you wear hijab, like why, So, and then they just didn't get it, why would you, and you pray there? Like, so it was hard for them to kind of wrap their head around, because it's so entwined with, the cultural norms of like, well, this is something you just do, you grow up with and you do, and it doesn't really mean anything, or it's not an indicator of, faith or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of navigating all that messy terrain. But I will say I have a friend who just moved here, and she's a nurse at Hopkins. She's also Palestinian Muslim and wears hijab. I know she's said to me when she was working in New Haven in Connecticut, she's had patients say to her, I don't want you to treat or work with me. I want someone who's not Muslim. So I know so I know it exists. I just can't speak. And I certainly will get stopped more often. I've been detained twice, I've been interrogated, blah, 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 but not in the workplace per se, but.
So just another question that came from the audience was specifically for Lara, and someone wanted to learn a little bit more about kind of what you were talking about earlier with your dad had said something about being a surgeon and the implications for a woman, and I guess maybe to expand a little bit about that and what you meant.
So I guess, not to put my dad on the spot, it was both he and my mom. So in his era, so he did his training in Nigeria. He worked for a couple of years after he graduated, or finished his surgical training, and then he spent 30 years in Saudi Arabia. So in his era, and still now, there weren't that many women in surgery. And what he envisioned in my life was sort of this really hard having this difficulty maintaining a work-life balance. So through the lens that he wore, he didn't think that surgery was the best route for me to happiness. And my mom, she was like, well, can't you do something, easier, like endocrinology or dermatology, something that doesn't require you to be at work all the time? And at least for medicine, I will say, kind of like your parents said, if there's something else, and particularly for surgery, if there's something else that would make you happy, do that instead. And for me, there wasn't anything else. And, in residency, there was a week that I worked 120 hours, but I got home that Friday and I was like, I am so excited. Like, this was amazing, even though I was exhausted. And so I think for me, it's the fact that work is not a choice. Like, do something that you love instead of, or how do they say it? You do the work that you love doing, and then it doesn't feel like work. But he was thinking in terms of having kids. I mean, I'm 33 and I'm not married, which in Nigeria is like blasphemy. And my mom already had all our kids by the age of 25. So they're certainly worried about me from that standpoint. And a lot of it is stemmed from my surgical training. I was like, there's no way that and people do it all the time. They have kids in surgery residency. But for me, I was just like, I can barely take care of myself, let alone someone else. So what his concerns are partially true, but what he doesn't realize is these days there are things like Blue Apron and, Molly Maid and, you can outsource things and there are other options. So that's what he meant. I think he was just sort of watching it out, not because he didn't think I could do it. And now I think his proud, I hope. But I think they were just really worried for what the implications would be for a female in surgery.
Okay, so this is a question for Laila. American Muslims are highly concentrated in the fields of medicine, engineering, and other sciences. How do you suggest Muslim communities can increase their representation in other fields, which is necessary to dismantle stereotypes and preconceived notions of Muslims in the general population?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they do exist in other fields. Maybe I have a, what do they call them, selection bias, because the people that I know are mostly, I mean, I know both in the medical and the non-medical, but there's a lot out there. It's just they're not as visible, I think, and I'm constantly myself surprised, like, oh, you know, there's two of the top senior producers at NPR are hijabi Muslims. I mean, people don't realize that because obviously they don't see them, but they're there, and I think there's becoming a recognition that this needs to happen. I absolutely agree, and it's not that, and obviously if like medicine is your calling, do it. But I agree, I feel like more and more we need to have people out there, you know, in different fields, in media, in whatever, and to also, you know, be visible and to be heard. And it's, you know, it's easier said than done because, you know, it's like, do you just go out and preach? What do you do? So, and I think more often than not, people are just kind of living their lives, their normal lives, and it's not like on their agenda. And this is something that applies beyond just the American Muslim landscape. Like, you know, having recently written a book about Palestinian women in Gaza, for example, this was constantly coming up. People will constantly just assume, oh, but the people of Gaza, they're like heroes and they're amazing. And they're like, no, we're just like regular human beings trying to live our lives. And it just happens that we're in this situation. And I feel it's the same for American Muslims. Like often it's like there's all this pressure to perform and do and be. And they're just, I think, in being a doctor. You could be a general practitioner, or in being an engineer, or in being a producer at a radio show. I mean, you're serving society, community, you're being a great example of a, you know, Muslim American, whatever that means. But it's because, again, the media lens tends to focus elsewhere, and I think this is part of the problem. We're not aware of their presence. But I would say, you know, as parents, to get back to your question, just encourage them to explore other fields and not just sort of the standard, you know, hard sciences, as it were, because some of the most interesting people I met, obviously, again, not to diss the medical field, but are like, you know, architects and designers, and I'm constantly like, wow, these people exist? You know, this is amazing what they do, so. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and if I can add to it, I think the reason there's a selection bias in the question is that, you know, a lot of these Muslims may be migrants or immigrants, and, you know, there are people who migrate, come in either for training, medical training, then stay back here, or research, go to engineering school or research, they stay back here. So I think you're seeing that sliver of, you know, the migrants or immigrants from these parts of the countries. But I can tell you, as a mother,
and it's harder to maybe break into other fields unless
that is very true.
Gone into the system. I can tell you for a fact. Yeah, yeah.
But I can tell you as a mother of two girls, and, you know, one is in college and the other almost to enter college, they have no interest in the field of medicine at all, despite the fact that both their parents are doctors and they have, you know, tons and tons of doctor friends around them, and or their parents' friends around them, because they have their own calling, and that's the beauty of raising your children in this culture. That calling is not going to come from what the expectations are, what the world wants me to do, what my culture wants me to do.
Or from your husband screening nonstop videos of eye surgeries to your kids.
There you go.
So it's amazing. Look, it's an eye. No.
So I think that, yes, as you see, you're right. First generation American Muslims, you will see that there's going to be a great diversity in the background of, you know, what these kids are going to step in. I think we're already seeing it, probably, and you will continue to see it. So you will be happy there will not be as many.
You know, another thing, I think it's not as a clear path, you know, like it's pretty sort of direct how you go into medicine, right?
Correct.
You know, like grad school, MCATs, whatever, you know, medical school, internship. But the other fields, it's a little bit more confusing, and this is where I think mentorship comes in, because you're right, it would have been great if I had someone say to me, you know, if you come here and you can kind of shadow me or experience what it's like, that would make a huge difference. So there's definitely that element is lacking of mentorships in other fields, like sort of non-medical fields, and to explain how you would get from point A to point B. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
just speaking from experience as well, my family moved, my grandparents had immigrated here as physicians and as accountants, kind of in those standard fields, but then my parents and my aunts and uncles growing up, they all kind of branched out to different areas, and now none of my cousins are interested in medicine besides for me. Just because we're running out of time, we just wanted to hear if there are any other questions from the audience. Yeah, of course.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. This is maybe a bit more pertinent for Mrs. Laila, but everyone else's input is also definitely appreciated. Speaking about Palestine, or really even mentioning the word Palestine is often seen as something that's controversial or sensitive. And I wanted to ask you how you've been able to navigate that, how you've been able to bring up conversations about that identity without, especially in certain settings where you're like for example in medicine, where you're told that you need to avoid anything sensitive that might make people feel uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and I know it's something that Yassine has grappled with because, like, for a long time, yeah, it's like this very sort of, sanitized environment where you don't bring up politics or you don't. But I mean, gradually it became unavoidable, and I think gradually as he sort of advanced his career, he became more comfortable with being able to talk about it and bringing it up, and or people might say like, where are you from? Or they might make a comment. He had a huge argument with one of his staff yesterday because somebody had sabra hummus and and he was talking about the boycott movement, and somebody else heard him and was like, anyway. So, of course, part of it is position and what you can afford to say and what you can't. And it's definitely true that there's probably more politics in academic medicine than regular medicine. I know that for a fact, and that's something he was aware of early on. But I think being able to use, if you have a position, being able to use it and bring up these conversations, these things subtly in conversation, whether it's sometimes, for me, like we'll slip it in there. The equivalent of, I think, his situation is being in moments or spaces where there's sort of suburban families or you're in a school function and people just talk about their lawns and about whatever and their kids, and there's all these other issues going on. And sometimes I'll just throw something in there like, can you believe Trump, or can you believe this, that, and the other? Or why don't they want to make Howard County a sanctuary community? And suddenly everyone's like, you want to make it a sanctuary? And they get, but then you're like, back to the PTA, so. So that's what I do. My strategy is to constantly just, be visible and put it out there. Like I'll go to soccer games and boycott Israeli apartheid shirts, and then, or we'll have, and then, and so, but then people are like, they're weirded out, but at the same time, it's normalizes it. Normalize it in the sense that you can then have conversations about it, and say, yeah, I'm here, my daughter's, whatever, the lead forward on the team, but also I'm Palestinian and this is an issue that affects all of us. And then we get into the, if they happen to ask, or I make it, let me put it this way, I give them an opening to be able to speak to me about things. I think that's important, that they can approach me and not feel like, antagonized or whatever. So I'll joke with them about issues that I think they think are funny, and then we'll be able to talk about other things. And I want them to know you can talk to me about anything, about hijab, about Muslims, about Palestine, and this is how I feel about it. So I try to merge those spaces as often as I can and not stay insular within the Muslim community. So, yes, that's important too, because a lot of the Muslim community isn't aware, doesn't know issues when it relates, the real issues when it comes to Palestine or Jerusalem. But then also to branch out to the wider, the PTA, the soccer community, the whatever, and begin to have these conversations. And I always tell people, to wear a conversation starter, because that's a good way, whether it's a shirt or a pin or something to help people be like, what is that? Or what's this map you're wearing? Or what's that about? Because there's often, you're right, there isn't a natural kind of opening or way to be able to speak about that. But yeah, I think one of my proudest moments was when my daughter got a disciplinary notice for speaking in class, out of line or whatever, because she was arguing with her classmate about a thing of sabra hummus that she brought. So and then I'm like, this is the proudest note. She's like, you're not mad? I'm like, no, this is great. I'm gonna hang it up. So.
Okay, so thank you to our wonderful panelists. We're nearing the end of our time here, so if you have any more questions or want to be further engaged with Amwell, feel free to email us at amwell@jhu.edu. Before we invite Dr. Hyder to provide some closing remarks, we would love for each of our panelists to reflect a little bit on the current political climate at home and abroad and share your recommendations to the audience for how to engage, support, and understand Muslims during this time.
So for me, there are two political climates. There's what's going on in Nigeria with Boko Haram, and then there's what's going on in America. And, I get asked about both. And I think they're quite similar in terms of it's still a lot of people not knowing what Islam is about and what radical Islamism is about, and knowing that that's not what most Muslims believe. And certainly the current political climate, I remember for the first month or so, or more than that, after the election, sort of just had this constant state of fear. I felt like for a moment, my sort of carefree nature of, I'm Muslim and just announcing it to whomever wanted or cared to know about it. I felt for a moment that I couldn't do that safely. I started wondering how my neighbors voted, what they really think. But I think I've gotten over that. I've come to the realization that the only way to combat sort of this current state of unrest is to keep having the tough conversations, is not to hide and say, well, because you can't tell by looking at me that I'm Muslim that I'm just going to keep quiet. No, I'm going to go back to what I used to do. If you ask me so my name here is Lara Oyetunji. My first name is Shakirat, and Lara is for my middle name, Lara, and I grew up being called Lara. But people ask, where did Lara come from? So I tell them, I'm like, Shakira, this is how I came about it, and it's a Muslim name because they think about the singer or the dancer. But so they're like, wow, you're Muslim. So I think more often than not, I am making a conscious effort to have the conversations that I just seamlessly had before, even though for a moment it was a little frightening to bring up those conversations, so.
Yeah, so I think for me, it was something very similar. I've been here for all these years. I've never thought about who I am, how do I look, whether somebody's looking at me and judging me. I was free of any of those issues till recently. And I would say that my life changed just completely. It was not only a sense of fear and anxiety for myself, but for people who are much more vulnerable than I am. For my daughters who go out into this country and they are as American as any American would be, who may be told that you go back to where you're coming from. Well, where are they going to go? This is where they belong. This is where we all belong. So I think, it definitely, the first month for me was almost like a funeral. Like I was grieving. I was grieving that country that I used to know, that I thought I used to know. But I'll tell you, I did something great for myself. I went to the Women's March on January the 21st, and I cannot tell you how it helped and treated me out of this doom and gloom that I was in. I was surrounded by all these people who were there, not for themselves, but for other people who may not intersect their lives, for people, and they were there for what they believed in, for what was right. And it was such an emotional experience for me. I cannot tell you, really, it's hard for me to describe it, but I somehow felt validated. I felt secure again. And though despite, since then, so much has happened, and like every morning you wake up and you say, goodness, what am I going to hit today? But somehow I think there's still so much that's good and wonderful about this country. So I think what I want to teach my girls, and I want to tell myself, is that when you're threatened as a community, any one of us, whether it's on the basis of your gender, your race, your religion, instead of, you can't afford to fall inwards. You can't afford to put the wall around you and say, goodness, I'm going to save myself from all these people who may hate me. Instead, I think it's really important to get back to your collective sense of humanity. That's what connects us all. No matter what your race, religion may be, at the end of the day, when you are a mother, you want, whether you're in the Gaza Strip or in the USA or in Africa or Nigeria, you want something very similar for your children, right? If you're a father, you are looking for the same things. And majority of humanity focuses on that. But there's no question about it that there is a minority among us that may not believe in this common collective humanity. But I don't think we can let them win. I think this earth, this planet, all of it, we owe it to our race and to this planet to just be together and always think about, all right, this Muslim mother, if there's something in her journey, it's very similar to my journey, whatever your faith may be. And this Muslim father's journey is exactly the same as my journey. It may be different in certain ways, but the core of it is the same. So I believe, for me, my religion, my faith, everything takes me to that collective humanity. And I think we need to focus on that to come out of the situation that we are in. I mean, there's no saying, we cannot deny this. We have to be realistic, but at the same time, we all have to stand together for each other and for our future generation. And again, I would say for this planet that I hold very dear to me.
Makes you want to sing Kumbaya. No, I'm kidding. No, it's so nice. I know, we are the world. It's funny because on the issue of being American, every time someone says that, I can't help but think of my mother when she was visiting here. She likes to keep it real, as we say. And so people would sometimes say to her, and she's very social and talks to everyone in the gym and whatever, but she has a thick accent. So they would say, oh, where are you from? And she would say, I'm from here. And then she would say, why you always refer to everyone African American, Asian American, but you never say European American. The only real American is Native American. She's like, and at first I was like, Mom. And then I was like, she has a point. I just say that for perspective, because in the end of the day, whenever someone is saying like, go back home or whatever, or don't make this a sanctuary county, or we don't want illegals. I'm like, who does this land really belong to anyway? And I'm just saying that having just come back from Australia, so it's kind of fresh in my mind that they're so much further along than I think the Americans are, in the sense that now they start every single function with a pledge reminding people that this area that we're on was the land of so-and-so, and we're not the inheritors of the land, and da-da-da, and then they start their thing. So anyway, I'm just saying that because that is, I think, part of the equation, and we have to be sensitive to that in any conversation we have about what it means to be American, that we're all really visitors here, right? But anyway, I think, the day after the elections, one of my neighbors came over, and she's a nurse, and she was like, she had this box of tea, and it was like, I think it was called Revive or Rejuvenate, and she was like, I don't know what else to do. Just take this tea, and I'm just so sorry, So, it was just really funny. We just both started laughing, and I was like, thanks, Kathy, I appreciate that. Whereas my other neighbor voted for Trump, and I totally didn't see that coming. She was like a liberal New Englander. But, again, it taught me the same life lesson that I've always, which is you should always expect the unexpected, don't get too comfortable, not in a bad sense of like we might all go, but just learn to cope with challenges as they arise. And again, and I remember something, I kept mentioning this to my children, that I always go back to the core values and essentials that I grew up with, my Islamic values. And one of the most beautiful sayings of the Prophet, ﷺ, peace be upon him, was that someone asks him what ihsan is, right? What like good character or the highest level of character and faith, beyond just sort of the ritual prayers that you can attain. Is it being somebody of good character and manners in return to someone who is good to you? And he said, no, it's not. It's actually being someone of good character and manners to someone who is not good to you or who does something to hurt you. And one of the highest levels of faith is being able to restrain yourself in a moment of rightful anger, justifiable anger. And you just, and so that's kind of what we came away with is, okay, despite this all, we amplify our efforts to get involved in our communities, Muslim and otherwise. If it's the Muslim community, go out and branch out and meet others of different, ethnic backgrounds, because we don't do enough of that. And I learned so much in the past few years because my best friend is Nigerian, Karima, but she just moved back. And she hadn't, learned so much from us being Palestinian. But branch out, if you're part of the Muslim community, branch out to the non-Muslim community, engage yourself in all areas, don't just be insular in your little community bubble. That's really important. And I think that one of my proudest moments as a mother is I was like in the kitchen and my daughter was speaking with two of my friends' younger daughters, African-American in her school, Muslim, and they were really worried. They were like, we heard that, it was after Trump was short elected, there's this talk of he may not let us stay here. So I didn't want to intervene, I just wanted the conversation to play out. So I was listening. And she said, no, Rabia, don't worry, because this is just a test from Allah. He wants to see how we're going to respond to this. And if we just, persevere and we're patient, and she's like 8, so I was like, she's like, if we're persevering, we're patient, it's gonna work out okay. We just have to keep doing what we're doing, So I was like, yeah. So I was really touched by that. I was like, okay, we're doing something right, So that's, in conclusion, what I would say is, reach out to communities, get involved. Get to know people you don't, have those difficult conversations. Even if it's just, I'm a big fan of just on the simplest level, having someone over for dinner, honestly. If you're a Muslim, have them over for iftar. You'd be surprised by how many non-Muslims haven't experienced iftar. If you're not, have them over for tea. It sounds really trivial, but it actually does a lot. So, my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. We'd just like to give everyone, thank you all for participating in this discussion.
Wow, thank you very much. Certainly today's panel has taught us innumerable lessons, which I'm not going to summarize at all. But suffice it to say that I think what you all represent are not just American Muslim women. You represent, first of all, humanity, as Dr. Haque said. And I think that, to me, is a very important lesson, that we have human lessons here. We have the capacity to reach out to those whom we think are different from us and build a bridge. Whether it's over tea, over dinner, or over rejuvenate tea. I love that. But I also think today our panel specifically invited women who are in the professions. That doesn't mean that women who are not in the professions or men who are not in the professions don't have these types of feelings and thoughts, and we are going to reach out to them as well. And in future seminars, we hope to have panels where we have individuals who come from different spectrums of life and talk about their identity and what they feel. I do want to challenge, however, some of you when you feel that you've not been discriminated against. I had to undergo training on something called implicit bias. And implicit bias is exactly that you can't detect it sometimes. You just don't know. And only when you go through that training, as I had to, because I have to interview people for jobs, I began to realize, wow, there are ways in which you can take decisions without explicitly going to that extreme form of discrimination. But there are light forms of biases that can play out too. So we don't know. But it's wonderful to hear your successes. We want to celebrate your success, but also through you, understand the important contribution that American Muslims in general, and particularly American Muslim women in the profession make. Thank you so much for sharing with us your experiences. And please stay tuned. In the next quarter, we'll have a different event for Mamwell. Thank you so much to all of you for attending.